The night they humiliated me, the ballroom was full of people who had never once fixed anything with their own hands. I remember the chandeliers first. 3 of them, hanging from a ceiling that was too high for any practical purpose, dripping crystal light over a room full of silk and perfume, and the specific laughter of people who have decided, without saying it aloud, that their comfort is the natural order of things. The floor was white marble, so polished that it reflected everything. The gowns, the shoes, the champagne glasses, like a second world beneath the first, equally beautiful and equally hollow. I stood at the entrance of that room in a borrowed suit that was 1 size too large in the shoulders and 1 size too small in the confidence, and I felt the room look at me the way rooms like that always look at people like me. Not with hostility, with something more precise than that, with the complete and absolute certainty that I did not belong there, and that the certainty required no discussion. My name is Kwabena Asante. I was 38 years old. I ran a workshop in Kumasi, Ghana, on a street that did not have a formal name on any map, in a building that my father had built with cinder blocks and patience and 30 years of knowing exactly how every engine in every car in that neighborhood worked. I had calluses on my hands that no amount of washing fully removed. I owned 1 good shirt, not a suit, a shirt, and it was currently folded in a bag in the cloakroom of the Accra International Convention Center, replaced by something borrowed that did not fit. The woman who had brought me here was standing at my left, and she was everything the room expected her to be. Composed, luminous, wearing a deep burgundy gown that moved with her like it had been made for this specific evening, which it had. Her name was Nana Ama Boateng, and she was the founder and chair of Boateng Holdings, 49 years old, one of the most significant private investors in West Africa, and the woman who had, over the course of 14 months, become the center of my world without either of us planning it. She was not holding my hand. She had offered in the car on the way here, and I had said not yet. I had wanted to walk into this room on my own terms. I had not understood in that moment what the room's terms already were, but I would understand very shortly. And if you have never been in a room that decided what you were before you opened your mouth, if you have never felt the temperature of 300 people's assumptions land on your skin at once, then stay with me. Because what happened next in that ballroom was not what any of us expected, not even the people who thought they had planned it. I had not wanted to come. I want to be honest about that, because the story of how I ended up in that ballroom begins weeks earlier, in my workshop in Kumasi, on a Tuesday afternoon, when Nana Ama had sat across from me on the old wooden chair I kept for clients, and said, with the directness I had come to both admire and find occasionally alarming, "The Boateng Foundation annual gala is in 6 weeks. I want you to come with me." I had looked at her. "To Accra," I said. "To Accra," she confirmed. "To a gala. The Foundation Gala. It's the most significant fundraising event of the year. 280 guests. Black tie." She paused. "I want you there." I had set down my wrench. Outside the workshop, the Kumasi afternoon was doing what Kumasi afternoons did. The heat, the noise, the smell of red dust and cooking fires and engine exhaust that was as familiar to me as my own breath. A woman was selling kelewel from a cart across the road. The smell of spiced fried plantain mixing with everything else in a way that was purely, specifically, home. I looked at Nana Ama in her cream linen dress and her single gold bracelet and her expression that was patient and certain in equal measure. "Why?" I said. "Because you are part of my life," she said. "And I am tired of keeping the parts of my life separate to make other people comfortable." I had thought about that for a moment. "There will be people there who won't like it," I said. "Yes," she said. "Your board members, your family." "Some of them," she said. "Your son." She was quiet for a moment. "Kwame will be there," she said carefully. "He may find it difficult." "Kwame Boateng. 28 years old, her only child from her marriage to the late Edmund Boateng, who had died 4 years ago and left behind a company, an estate, a foundation, and a son who had grown up understanding that the Boateng name was both a gift and a set of expectations, and who had structured his entire identity around being the person who would protect and extend that name. Kwame and I had not met. We had not needed to. His opinion of me had been communicated through the particular ecosystem of family silence and strategic absence that families use when they have decided something about a person and do not wish to be seen being unkind. "I know," I said. "Does that change your answer?" she asked. I thought about it honestly. My father had built a workshop on a street with no name. He had raised me to understand that dignity was not something you asked for. It was something you carried into every room, quietly, without ceremony, and set down in the center of the space and waited for people to recognize it. The recognition was not always immediate, but it was always eventually necessary. "No," I said. "It doesn't change my answer." She had looked at me with that expression she sometimes had, not quite a smile, something more internal than that. The expression of someone who has been trying to believe something is possible and has just received a small, precise confirmation. "Then I'll have something sent for you to wear," she said. "I'll find my own clothes," I said. She looked at the workshop, then at me, then at the workshop again. "Kwabena," she said. "I'll find something suitable," I said firmly. She had said nothing more about it. The suit that arrived at my workshop 3 days later, in a garment bag with an Accra tailor's label, was measured to my exact dimensions, which meant she had given the tailor my measurements without telling me, which meant she had memorized my measurements at some point during the months we had known each other, which was the kind of thing Nana Ama Boateng did. Quietly, practically, without announcement, with the specific attentiveness of a woman who paid close attention to the people she cared about. I had looked at the suit for a long time. Then I had hung it in the corner of my workshop and not told anyone it was there. I had met Nana Ama Boateng 11 months before the Gala, in a way that had nothing glamorous about it and everything honest. Her convoy had broken down on the Accra-Kumasi highway, 11 kilometers outside the city, on a Thursday morning in July, when the harmattan dust was still in the air, and the road heat was already building toward the particular aggressive temperature that the highway reached by 10 o'clock. 3 vehicles, 2 SUVs and the lead car, a black Land Cruiser, all stopped by the side of the road, the lead vehicle completely dead, the driver on the phone with a panicked expression. I had been passing in my truck, returning from a parts delivery. I had stopped because it was a fixable problem, and I had the tools, and because my father had raised me the way he raised me. The driver had been explaining the situation to whoever was on the phone, and then a rear window had come down, and a voice had said, "You, what are you looking at?" Not rude, just direct. The voice of someone accustomed to having their time respected. "I'm looking at a fuel pump failure," I said. "The secondary relay has gone. It's a 30-minute fix if you have the part, longer if you don't." A silence. "Do you have the part?" the voice said. "Not for this model," I said. "But I can do a temporary bypass that will get the car to the nearest garage in Kumasi. It won't be pretty, but it will hold." Another silence. "How long?" the voice said. 45 minutes, I said. "Do it." I did it in 38. When I was done and the car was running, the window came down again, and this time she leaned forward slightly so I could see her properly. Not the polished public version I would come to see in newspaper photographs later. The road version, no particular composure, just a woman in a seat who had been dealing with a logistical problem and was processing its resolution. She looked at me. "You saved my morning," she said. "You'd have been fine," I said. Eventually, something moved in her face, almost amusement. "What's your name?" Quabena Asante. Asante Auto, Kumasi. Quabena. She said it like she was testing it. Thank you. Safe journey, I said. The window went up. The convoy moved. I drove back to Kumasi, thinking nothing more of it. 2 weeks later, a personal assistant called to ask whether Asante Auto would be interested in a fleet maintenance contract for the Boateng Holdings Kumasi vehicles. I said yes. And so it began. The contract had been what it was supposed to be, professional, well-structured, exactly as detailed as it needed to be, and no more. Nana Ama herself had been involved in the initial meetings in a way that surprised me. Most people at her level delegated everything to 2 or 3 layers of management before a conversation reached them. She did not. She came to the first meeting herself, to the second, and by the third meeting it was clear that the meetings were no longer entirely about the vehicles. She was curious about the workshop, about the work, about the particular philosophy my father had built the business on and that I had inherited and refined. She asked questions the way people ask when they are genuinely trying to understand something, not when they are performing interest for social reasons. She listened to the answers with the full attention of someone who has learned that information gathered in person is worth more than information gathered through intermediaries. I was careful, not cold. I was not built for cold, the same way the workshop was not built for pretense. But careful. I was aware of what she was, and I was aware of what I was, and I was aware that the space between those two things was significant enough to merit caution. She was not careful. Or rather, she was careful about everything except the growing reality of what was happening between us, which she seemed to have identified, processed, and accepted with the same directness she brought to every difficult thing. She told me this later, months after the fact. She said, "I knew what it was before you did. I just waited for you to catch up." I had said, "That's an efficient approach." She had said, "I've always found patience is more productive than pretending." I had thought about that for a long time. She was right. She usually was. By the 8th month, the visits to the workshop were not about vehicles. By the 10th month, I had driven to Accra twice, the first time to deliver a report she could have received by email, but which she had asked for in person because she wanted to walk me through a decision she was trying to make about the foundation's logistics expansion, and the second time because she had called on a Sunday evening and said simply, "I need someone to talk to who is actually listening," and then I had understood that and driven down. By the 11th month, on a Wednesday afternoon in the workshop with the rain coming down hard outside and the sound of it on the zinc roof filling the space with a particular intimate sound, she had looked at me across the small table and said, "I think we both know what this is." I had looked at her. "Yes," I said. "Is it a problem?" she asked. I thought about it honestly. The workshop around me. My father's tools on the wall, the calluses on my hands, the suit in the corner of the room that I hadn't moved in 3 weeks. "Not for me," I said. "Good," she said, "because it isn't for me either." She reached across the table. I took her hand. The rain continued on the zinc roof. The Kumasi afternoon moved on, indifferent and warm, and we sat there in the honest space of a workshop that had never needed to pretend to be anything, and it was the most settled I had felt in years. But I already knew that settled feelings and complicated realities were 2 different things, and the most complicated reality had not yet introduced itself. Kwame Boateng introduced himself at the Gala. Not in a private conversation, not at a family dinner, not in any of the controlled and humane ways that introductions between people who have a great deal at stake can be managed. He introduced himself publicly, in the middle of a ballroom full of 280 guests, at the exact moment he had calculated would have the most impact. But I'm ahead of myself. The evening had started with a specific, managed tension, the kind that has a shape and a temperature, and that everyone in the room feels, but nobody names. Nana Ama and I had arrived together, which was the first statement, and the statement had landed exactly as she had intended it to. Not provocatively. She was not a provocative person, but clearly she had walked into the Accra International Convention Center at 7:45 in a burgundy gown that was everything the room expected of her, with me at her side in the Kumasi tailor's suit that fit better than I had expected, and she had moved through the greeting line of board members and donors and partners with the unhurried authority of a woman who had hosted this event 9 times and knew every person in the room. She introduced me to the ones she stopped to speak with, not as a business associate, not as her mechanic, as Kwabena. Just my name. And then she continued the conversation, including me in it, with the natural ease of someone who has decided that a person belongs in a conversation and is simply demonstrating that fact. Most of them responded with the calibrated professionalism of people who had learned to manage surprises gracefully in social settings. A few were genuinely warm. One man, an older industrialist from Takoradi who had known Nana Ama for 20 years, shook my hand and asked about the workshop with what seemed like actual curiosity. But I felt the other ones. The ones who shook hands and smiled and said the right words and let their eyes do something else entirely. The women who looked at my suit, which was good, which was genuinely good, but which was not the specific provenance of suit that moved through rooms like this one as a matter of inheritance, and let their assessment travel and settle. The men who noted my hands and recalibrated everything they were looking at. They spoke around me in the specific way that certain rooms have of acknowledging a presence without addressing it. I had been spoken around before. I knew how to stand in it. What I did not yet know was that the room had a specific architecture that I hadn't been shown, that there were corners of it that had been prepared before I arrived. The first corner I encountered was a woman named Abena Mensah Kwanzaa. She was 53 years old, a board member of the Boateng Foundation, a woman whose late husband had been Edmund Boateng's closest business partner, and who had therefore occupied a position within the Boateng orbit for decades that was more family than professional. She was dressed in gold, which suited her, and which she knew suited her. And she had the particular smile of someone who has decided, before crossing a room, exactly what the conversation is going to contain. She came to us 20 minutes into the evening, while Nana Ama was speaking with 2 foundation directors about the year's disbursements. She extended her hand to me first. "You must be Kwabena," she said. "I've heard so much about you." I shook her hand. "I'm afraid I haven't heard about you," I said. Something flickered in her smile. Abena Mensah Kwanzaa. I was Edmund's partner's wife for 30 years. She paused. Almost family. "A pleasure," I said. She turned to Nana Ama with the warmth of someone who has known another person through every significant season of their life. "Nana Ama, you look wonderful." "Thank you, Abena." "It's brave," Abena said pleasantly, "bringing someone new to the gala, after so many years." She let that settle. Edmund would have found it interesting. The mention of the name landed between us with the precision of something placed deliberately. Nana Ama held her gaze. "Edmund was a practical man," she said. "He would have found it sensible." Abena smiled again. "Of course." She looked at me once more, the full assessing look this time, not the social skim. And then she said, "Do enjoy the evening," and moved away through the crowd with the unhurried confidence of someone who has delivered what she came to deliver. Nana Ama didn't say anything for a moment. I said, "She came to see what I looked like." "Yes," she said, "and now she'll tell people what she saw." "She already is," Nana Ama said, without looking around the room to confirm it. She didn't need to confirm it. She had been in rooms like this for 30 years. She looked at me. "Are you all right?" she asked. "I've been looked at before," I said. "Not like this." "No," I admitted. "Not exactly like this." I paused, but I'm still standing. She held my gaze for a moment. Then she put her hand on my arm, briefly, precisely the way she touched things she wanted to anchor, and said, "Then let's go find dinner." But that wasn't the worst part. The worst part was already standing across the ballroom, watching us. I noticed Kwame Boateng before he came to speak to us. He was easy to identify, not because he looked like his mother, though there was a quality of her in the precision of his eyes, but because of how he occupied the room. He was tall, well-dressed in the way that young men are well-dressed when they have never had to think about what clothes cost, with the particular posture of someone who has been told their whole life that they are significant. He was 28, but carried himself with the deliberate gravity of someone trying to be 40, which was the tell. The gravity of the genuinely self-assured is effortless. The gravity of the performing self-assured is slightly too visible. He was with a group of 3, 2 men his age, and an older woman I didn't recognize, and he was talking, but his eyes were moving, tracking the room the way people track rooms when they are looking for something specific. He found it. He found me. And in the 2 seconds before he adjusted his expression back to the neutral public version, I saw what was in his face. Not anger, not contempt, fear. The specific fear of someone who has identified a threat to something they have organized their life around protecting and is calculating how to neutralize it without appearing to have done so deliberately. I had seen that face before. On Obina, on Victor. On every man who had looked at a situation he hadn't authorized and decided that the unauthorized element needed to be managed. I had learned, from all of them, that the calculation had already been made before the face adjusted back. Whatever Kwame was going to do tonight, he had planned it in advance. I said nothing to Nana Ama. I followed her to the dinner table. And I waited. The Boateng Foundation Gala was not merely a social event. It was, I understood as the evening progressed, a carefully orchestrated performance of institutional authority. The dinner itself was structured around the Foundation's annual report, presented in a 15-minute address by Nana Ama that was precise and moving in equal measure, describing the year's outcomes across education, healthcare infrastructure, and vocational training programs with the particular combination of data and human story that made numbers feel like people. She was extraordinary at it. I had known this in the abstract. I had read about her in the months after I first met her, the way you read about a person when you are trying to understand a context. But reading about it and sitting 12 feet away watching it were different experiences. There was a quality to how she held a room, not through performance, but through the complete and obvious authenticity of someone who is saying what they actually believe. That was unlike anything I had seen in a professional setting. She looked at me once during the address, not a signal, not a public demonstration, just a look, brief and private, the look of someone checking that the person they care about is still there. I was still there. The address ended. The room applauded with the specific warmth of people who are genuinely moved and the specific enthusiasm of people who want their movement to be visible to the right people. The evening's program continued. A short film about one of the Foundation's vocational training projects, followed by the formal fundraising portion. And then the dinner service began, and the room shifted from performance to conversation, and the space between the tables became navigable again. I was at the head table, which had been Nana Ama's deliberate choice, beside her on one side, with the Foundation's executive director on her other side. The table also included 2 board members, the Foundation's legal counsel, and 1 empty seat that had been Edmund Boateng's customary place, and that Nana Ama had, I would learn later, kept empty at every gala since his death. The empty chair was beside me. I noticed Kwame look at it when he took his seat at the adjacent table. Something moved through his face that was complex and private. and that I did not try to interpret. Because grief has shapes that don't belong to anyone outside the person carrying it. The dinner conversation at the head table was professional and pleasant. The executive director asked me questions about the fleet maintenance operation with genuine technical curiosity. The legal counsel, a woman named Essie Appia, was sharp and funny, and the kind of person who asks the question everyone else is thinking but has decided is inappropriate. She asked me directly, over the fish course, how I had come to know Nana Ama. Her car broke down, I said. Essie looked at me, then at Nana Ama, then back at me. That's it, she said. That's it, I said. And now you're at the head table of the Bodang Foundation Gala. Yes, I said. She considered this for a moment. Then she picked up her fork. I like it, she said. It's a good story. Nana Ama had said nothing, but I had felt, without looking at her, the warmth of someone trying not to smile. The main course arrived, and then Kwame came to the table. He came during the natural pause between courses, when people moved between tables, and the room's social traffic was at its most fluid. He walked to the head table with the ease of someone who belonged there, which he did as the founder's son, and he greeted the board members by name, warmly, with the practiced social fluency of someone who had grown up attending these events and knew everyone in the room. He greeted his mother. Mama! He bent to kiss her cheek. She received it with a composed expression that told me she had been expecting this and had already decided how to handle it. Kwame, she said, you look well. Thank you. He straightened. He looked at me. He had a glass of champagne in his hand and a smile on his face that was careful and complete, and cost him something I could see only in the very slight tension around his eyes. And you must be Kwabena, he said. Yes, I said. I did not stand. We were mid-dinner, but I met his eyes directly. Kwame. He extended his hand. I shook it. His grip was firm, intentionally firm. The grip of someone making a statement with a handshake. My mother has mentioned you, he said. She's mentioned you too, I said. He sat down, uninvited, in the chair of the board member who had temporarily stepped away, with the ease of someone who moves through spaces as if he has prior claim on them. He set his champagne glass on the table and leaned back with a relaxed posture that was not entirely relaxed. So, he said pleasantly, a mechanic? Yes, I said. From Kumasi. Yes, my grandfather was from Kumasi, he said. A market trader. He built everything the family has from a small stall in Kajetia. He paused, letting the information settle the way information settles when it has been selected and deployed rather than shared naturally. We respect the working people of Kumasi in this family. The word working landed with its particular weight. I looked at him. That's good to hear, I said. He smiled. Of course, the family has come a long way since then. My father's generation built Boteng Holdings into what it is. My generation... He paused. Well, we have our own responsibilities. I imagine you do, I said. It's a significant thing, he said, still pleasantly. A name like ours. The board expects continuity. The donors expect institutional stability. The foundation's credibility depends in part on the personal credibility of its leadership. He looked at his champagne glass, then at me. You understand that kind of responsibility, I'm sure. Running a family business. He had done it cleanly. No raised voice, no obvious cruelty. Just a sequence of reasonable-sounding observations, each one a step in a staircase that led to a specific destination, and the destination was, you are a threat to something important, and important people are watching, and the sensible thing is for you to understand that. Nana Ama was very still beside me. Not tense, still. The stillness of someone who is choosing in real time. Which kind of response serves the situation best? I looked at Kwame, I said. Your father built Bowden Holdings with a market trader's son's understanding of how things actually work. Not how they look. How they work. I paused. I have a lot of respect for that. Kwame's smile stayed in place, but something behind it shifted. Of course, he said. And I think, I said, that a man who actually understood what his father built would know the difference between institutional credibility and personal control. The table went quiet. Not entirely. The room was still full of conversation, the sound of dinner continuing all around us. But at the head table, in the space occupied by those specific words, the quiet was very present. Kwame looked at me. For the first time since he had sat down, the careful architecture of the pleasant conversation dropped away, and what was underneath was simply a young man who was frightened of something and had been taught that the correct response to fear was assertion. "Excuse me," he said. He stood. He picked up his champagne glass. He nodded to his mother, a nod that contained a great deal that neither of them would say in this room. And he walked back toward his own table. Apia, who had been watching the entire exchange with the focused attention of a lawyer who is professionally trained to observe things that matter, picked up her fork and resumed eating. "Well," she said quietly, to no one in particular. "That was interesting." Nana Ama said nothing, but under the table, out of the sight of 280 guests and their particular calculations, she found my hand. I held it. And I thought, that was the first move. There will be others. The second move came an hour later from a direction I had not been watching. The evening had progressed to the post-dinner reception, the portion where the formal program ended and the room became a social instrument again, people moving with their drinks and their conversations through the high-ceilinged space with the particular freedom of a structured event that has completed its obligations and is now simply existing. I had excused myself briefly to find the bathroom, and on my way back through the corridor that connected the reception area to the main ballroom, I encountered a man I recognized from the dinner table, one of the older board members, a man named Dr. Kofi Asumeng Boate, who had been in the Boateng Holdings orbit since Edmund's founding years. 70 years old, silver-haired, with the careful posture of someone who had spent decades in rooms where precision mattered. He was standing near the corridor window, and when he saw me, he did not move away. He waited, which told me the encounter was not accidental. "Mr. Asante," he said. "Dr. Asumeng Boate," I said. "A moment," he said. "Not a question." I stopped. He looked at the corridor, checking it in the practiced way of people who have spent their lives having conversations that required privacy. "I'm going to speak plainly," he said. "Please," I said. "I have known Nana Ama for 26 years, he said. "I was on the original board her husband assembled. I have watched her build this foundation and this company through periods that would have broken most people." He paused. "She is one of the most capable people I have ever known." "I agree," I said. "Then you understand that her reputation is not merely personal," he said. "It is institutional. The foundation's credibility, the board's credibility, depends on public confidence in her judgment." I looked at him steadily. "I understand that there are people who will see my presence here as a judgment question," I said. "Yes," he said. "There are." "And what do you see it as?" I said. He was quiet for a moment. He looked at me with the full attention of someone who has been assessing people for 7 decades and has reached the age where he can afford to be honest about what he finds. "I see it as something I don't fully understand yet," he said. "Which is why I'm having this conversation instead of forming a fixed opinion." He paused. "I've asked about you, your business, your record, the people who work for you." Another pause. "The reports are consistent." "Consistent how?" I said. "Honest," he said simply. "Capable. A man who delivers what he says he'll deliver and doesn't oversell what he is. He looked at his drink. That is rarer than it should be. I said nothing. I'm not here to threaten you, he said. I want to be clear about that. What Kwame is planning... He stopped. My stomach tightened. What Kwame is planning, I said. Dr. Asumeng Boati looked at me carefully. There is a motion, he said, to be raised tonight, at the informal board gathering that happens at the end of every gala. It's a tradition. The board members gather in the smaller reception room for 30 minutes to discuss the year informally. Kwame intends to raise a motion regarding a conflict of interest review of the fleet maintenance contract. I held myself very still. He intends to argue that the contract was awarded improperly, the doctor continued. That the personal relationship preceded the contract. That the Foundation's procurement standards have been compromised. The personal relationship did not precede the contract, I said. The contract was awarded 9 months before anything personal developed. I know that, he said. I've reviewed the timeline myself. He paused. But Kwame has found a lawyer who believes that an argument can be made that the basis for the personal relationship, the initial highway encounter, constitutes a prior connection that should have been disclosed. I understood now. It was not about the truth. It was about the process, about creating a formal process that would take time and generate noise and require Nana Ama to defend a decision that needed no defense in a setting where the defense itself would be interpreted as evidence of compromised judgment. It was about the appearance of a question mark, placed precisely where it would do the most damage. I thought about Obinna. I thought about Victor. I thought about every man who had looked at something he didn't control and reached for a procedural weapon. Why are you telling me this? I said. Dr. Asumeng Boati looked at the corridor window. Outside, the Accra night was warm and full of the city's particular energy. The traffic, the generators, the constant, indifferent pulse of a place that was always moving. Because I have been on that board for 26 years, he said. And I have watched it be used as a tool for personal agendas more times than I can count. He looked at me. I am tired of it. He paused. And because whatever Nana Ama has chosen, she has chosen it with the full capacity of someone who has never made a careless decision in her professional life. That deserves to be respected. I nodded. The gathering is in 40 minutes, he said. I thought you should know. He walked back toward the ballroom. I stood in the corridor for a moment. The Accra night moved beyond the window. I thought about the suit that had arrived at my workshop, measured to my exact dimensions, from a tailor Nana Ama had sent without telling me she was sending him. I thought about a highway in July, and a direct voice through a car window asking why I had stopped. I thought about my father, building something real in a city that was not built to make it easy, with tools and time and the specific dignity of a man who knew what he was worth. I took out my phone. I called one person. Then I went back into the ballroom. I found Nana Ama speaking with the Foundation's executive director and 2 major donors near the east wall. She was composed and present and completely herself. The woman who could hold a fundraising conversation and an internal calculation at the same time and show neither on her face. She saw me coming, and something shifted in her expression. Not visible to anyone who didn't know how to read her, but present. I came to stand beside her. She finished her sentence to the donors, excused herself with a grace that cost nothing, and walked with me a few feet away from the nearest group. What happened? She said quietly. I told her about Dr. Asumeng Boati. All of it. She listened without interrupting. Her face did not change. She had the quality, which I had observed over 11 months and never stopped finding remarkable, of processing difficult information without letting the processing show, the way a strong structure absorbs stress without visibly deforming. When I finished, she was quiet for a moment. "He's been planning this since he found out about the gala," she said. "He needed a public setting. The board gathering at the end of the evening is the only time all 12 members are in the same room informally." She paused. "He chose tonight because he knew I would be distracted." "Are you distracted?" I said. She looked at me. "No," she said. "I'm angry." She said it with the precise, measured quality of someone who is angry and has decided exactly what to do with the anger. "But I'm not distracted." "I made a call," I said. She looked at me. "Who did you call?" she said. "Someone who has information that Kwame doesn't know I have," I said. "Someone who can be here in 30 minutes." She studied my face. "Kwabena," she said carefully. "What information?" I looked at her. 11 months ago, I said, when the fleet contract was being reviewed, your procurement officer, the one who has since left the Foundation, made a specific recommendation in writing. I have a copy of that recommendation. It was independent, unprompted, and it states clearly that the vendor selection was based on performance record and competitive pricing, with no external considerations. I paused. He sent it to me at the time, as the vendor, for my records. Standard procedure. She was very still. "You've had that document this whole time," she said. "I keep records of everything," I said. "My father's habit. Every communication, every invoice, every written statement, in a folder, dated and filed." She looked at me for a long moment. The ballroom moved around us, the crystal light, the champagne, the 280 carefully dressed people navigating their particular calculations. "And the person you called," she said. "My lawyer," I said. "Aqua. She's in Accra. She has the document on file with her office because she reviewed the contract before I signed it." I paused. "She can be here with a certified copy in 25 minutes. Nana Ama held my gaze. Something moved through her face that I had not seen from her before. Not quite surprise. She had known me long enough to know I was prepared. Something more personal than that. The specific expression of someone who has been carrying a weight alone for a long time and has just had someone put their hand on the other side of it. "You prepared for this," she said. "I prepare for things," I said. "It's what I do." She looked away for a moment, at the room, at the crystal light on the marble floor, at the particular world she had built, and that was currently, in a room 30 meters away, being prepared for a challenge she hadn't authorized. Then she looked back at me. "Call Akua," she said. "Tell her to bring 2 copies." "Already done," I said. She held my gaze for one more moment. Then she straightened, the almost imperceptible straightening of a woman who has made a decision and is ready to walk toward it, and said, "Then let's finish the evening." We went back into the room, and 25 minutes later, everything that had been planned for that night began to come apart in ways that nobody except 2 people had anticipated. The board gathering took place in the Meridian Room, a smaller space off the main corridor, furnished with the particular intimacy of a room designed for conversations that mattered. Round tables, low lighting, a bar set up along one wall, the kind of room that said, "This is informal," while meaning, "This is where the real decisions happen." I had not been invited. That was expected. The gathering was for board members only, a tradition that predated Nana Ama's tenure, and that she had maintained, because it served a genuine purpose. The informal exchange between board members that formal meetings didn't allow. The kind of conversation where people said what they actually thought, rather than what the agenda required. Tonight, it would serve a different purpose. Nana Ama had gone in at 9:45. She had squeezed my hand once in the corridor outside, a brief and complete gesture, and then she had walked through the door with the straight back and the composed face of a woman who has been walking into difficult rooms for 30 years and has learned that the walk itself is a statement. I stood in the corridor. Aqua arrived at 9:52, She was a small woman, 43 years old, with close-cropped hair and reading glasses pushed up on her forehead, and the particular energy of a lawyer who has been called on a Friday evening and arrived anyway because the situation warranted it. She carried a leather satchel and wore a look that was professionally neutral and personally curious. She handed me an envelope. 2 certified copies, she said. Original timestamp, notarized, chain of custody documented. She looked at the door of the Meridian room. Do you need me inside? Not yet, I said. Stand by. She nodded. She took a position near the corridor wall with the patience of someone who has spent a career waiting for the right moment to present information. I looked at the door. I thought about what was happening on the other side of it. 12 board members. Nana Ama at the center. Kwame, who was not a board member, but whose relationship to the family gave him a traditional place at this informal gathering. The motion being raised, the words being assembled, the procedural architecture being constructed around a foundation of something that was not true. I thought about my father's workshop on the street with no name. I thought about a callus that no amount of washing fully removed. I thought about the suit in the corner of my workshop that I had looked at for 3 weeks before putting it on, and what it had felt like to put it on. Not a transformation, not a disguise, but simply clothes that fit a man who had always been exactly who he was in a room that had decided what he was before looking. I checked my watch. 9:58. I opened the door. The room went quiet when I entered. Not the polite quiet of a social gathering acknowledging a new arrival. The specific, loaded quiet of a room that has been discussing something and has been interrupted by the exact subject of that discussion walking through the door. 12 board members at 2 round tables. Nana Ama standing near the far wall, which told me the motion had already been introduced, and that she had already responded, and that the room was in the middle of something. Kwame standing beside one of the tables with his champagne glass and his careful posture and his expression that shifted when he saw me, through surprise and then calculation, and then something that tried to reassemble itself as composure. Dr. Asumeng Boati was seated at the near table. He looked at me, and then looked at the room, and then looked back at his drink in the way of someone who has done what they intended to do and is now observing results. Nana Ama looked at me. I looked at her. She gave a small, almost invisible nod. I came fully into the room and closed the door behind me. Mr. Asante. It was Kwame who spoke first, because Kwame was always going to speak first. His voice was controlled. This is a board gathering. It's not open to whom, I said. My voice was level. I had not raised it. I had no intention of raising it. To outside parties, he said. I'm not an outside party to the subject currently being discussed, I said. And I have information that is directly relevant to the motion on the table. Kwame looked at his mother, then back at me. There is no motion formally on the table. This is an informal... Kwame. The voice was Dr. Asumeng Boati's. Quiet, from his seat, without looking up from his drink. Let him speak. A silence. Kwam's jaw was tight. He was doing the calculation, the visible, rapid calculation of someone who had planned for many scenarios and was currently assessing which response served his position best. The calculation produced a result he didn't like, because the result was that, refusing to let me speak, in front of 12 board members who had all just heard Dr. Asumeng Boati's instruction, would tell everyone in the room more about his intentions than his words had yet revealed. He stepped back. I walked to the center of the room. I looked at the board members, 12 faces, different levels of familiarity with the situation, different positions already being held. I did not spend time reading them. I had not come to win a room. I had come to present information, which was a different thing. I understand a concern has been raised tonight about the procurement process for the fleet maintenance contract between Asante Auto and the Boteng Foundation, I said. Specifically, a concern that the personal relationship between Mrs. Boateng and myself may have influenced the contract award. No one confirmed or denied it. They didn't need to. The room's silence confirmed it. "I have here," I said, and I took the envelope from my jacket pocket, "a certified copy of the written recommendation made by the Foundation's procurement officer at the time of the contract award. This document is dated 9 months before any personal relationship between Mrs. Boateng and myself existed. It was prepared independently, without solicitation, and was sent to me as the successful vendor as standard procedure. It states the basis for the vendor selection: performance record, competitive pricing, and service capability, with no reference to any personal consideration because no personal consideration existed." I placed the envelope on the table nearest to me. I looked at Kwame. "I don't know what version of events is being discussed tonight," I said. "But I know what the documents say, and I know what the timeline shows. And I know that a man who sincerely believed his mother's judgment had been compromised would want to see the documents before raising a formal concern, not after." The room was very quiet. Kwame was looking at the envelope. His champagne glass was still in his hand, and I noticed, in the particular stillness that had settled in the room, that his grip on it had tightened. "That document doesn't address the fundamental concern," he said. His voice was still controlled, but the architecture of the argument had shifted, and he could hear it shifting. "The concern is about the appearance of a conflict." "The appearance of a conflict," Nana Ama said. Everyone looked at her. She had not moved from the far wall. She had not needed to move. She had the quality, which I had watched in the ballroom for 3 hours, and which never stopped being extraordinary, of making a room come to her rather than going to the room. "Let me be clear about something," she said. "I have been running this foundation for 9 years. I have sat in this room at the end of every gala, and had this informal conversation with this board for 9 years. I have never, in 9 years, had my procurement decisions questioned in this room." She paused. "The only thing that has changed this year is that I brought someone with me tonight who does not hold the right credentials for this room in the opinion of some people present." She looked at her son. "Kwame," she said. Her voice was not cruel. It was direct in the specific way that only the most honest love can be direct. Without performance, without hedging, without the protective layer that people use when they are trying to manage rather than speak. "I know what this is, and I know that it comes from a place that is real and that matters to you. You loved your father. You want to protect what he built. I understand that." She paused. "But your father built something because he saw people clearly and refused to reduce them to what they appeared to be on the surface." She held his gaze. "He would not recognize what you're doing tonight as protection." The room absorbed this. Kwame looked at his mother, and something happened in his face that I watched carefully, because I had seen versions of it before. In Victor, in Obina. But this version was different. The versions I had seen before had been the faces of men who had made their calculation and were adjusting their strategy in response to an obstacle. This version was the face of a young man who had just heard his mother say his father's name in the context of his own behavior and felt for the first time the full weight of the comparison. He looked down at his champagne glass. He set it on the table. He looked up. "I'd like to see the document," he said quietly. I looked at him. Then I picked up the envelope and walked it to him personally. He took it. He opened it. He read it. The room waited. He read it twice. I could tell by the slight pause and the return of his eyes to the top of the page. Then he folded it carefully and held it for a moment. Then he looked at the board. "I withdraw the concern," he said. Not dramatically, not performatively, the way a person says something when they have decided to say it and have run out of reasons not to. Dr. Azumeng Boati raised his drink slightly. in a gesture so small it was almost invisible, and took a sip. One of the female board members, a woman I had not yet met, who had been watching the entire exchange from the far table with an expression of careful assessment, said simply, "Good." And that was it. The room exhaled. The particular architecture of what had been planned dissolved quietly, without the drama its builder had intended, and what was left was simply 12 people in a room at the end of a long evening, with drinks in their hands and the particular loosening of shoulders that happens when a tension has been released. Nana Ama crossed the room. She came to stand beside me. She did not put her arm through mine, did not make a declaration, did not frame the moment as a victory that needed to be marked. She simply stood beside me, in the quiet way of someone who has chosen where they are standing and needs no further announcement. I felt her presence at my shoulder the way I felt the Kumasi afternoon in my workshop. Warm, specific, completely itself. Kwame looked at us both. He looked for a long time. Then he walked to his mother and kissed her cheek. Not the social kiss of the earlier greeting, but the genuine one, the kind that costs something. "I'm sorry, Mama," he said. Low, private. She put her hand on his arm briefly. Then she looked at me over his shoulder. And I saw, in her face, the same expression I had seen at the small workshop table in Kumasi on a Wednesday afternoon with rain on the zinc roof. The expression of someone who has been trying to believe something is possible and is now holding the proof of it in the present tense. Not triumph, not relief, just the quiet, particular warmth of being exactly where you are supposed to be. The rest of the gala evening passed in the way that evenings pass when the pressure that has been building in them has been released. Not anticlimactically, but with the specific pleasant ease of a space that has been let back to itself. People talked. Drinks were finished. The Accra night moved beyond the convention center's tall windows in its usual indifferent way. Abena Mensa Kwanzaa found me near the end of the evening, by the bar, where I was standing with a glass of water, and the particular quietness of someone who has been in a room full of people for 4 hours, and has used up the portion of their social energy that was available for deployment. She looked at me with a different expression than the one she had worn at the beginning of the evening. The assessment was still there. She was not a woman who stopped assessing things, but the calculation behind it had changed. "You handled that well," she said. "I just showed a document," I said. "You showed a document at the right moment, in the right room, in the right way," she said. "That's not nothing." She paused. Edmund used to say that the most important thing in any negotiation was understanding the difference between information and leverage. Information is what you know. Leverage is knowing when to use it. She looked at me steadily. "You understood that tonight." I said nothing. "He would have found you interesting," she said. I looked at her. "I'll take that," I said. She smiled. A real one this time, not the calibrated social version she had deployed at the beginning of the evening. Then she walked away with the unhurried confidence of someone who has decided to revise a position and has no discomfort about the revision. Kwame found me 20 minutes later, near the exit, while Nana Ama was saying her final goodbyes to the board members at the other end of the room. He stood in front of me with the particular posture of someone who has decided to do a difficult thing and is doing it before the decision can soften. "I owe you an apology," he said. Direct, without preamble, in the way of people who have been raised by direct women. "You don't have to—" I started. I do," he said. "What I planned tonight was wrong, not just strategically, wrong." He met my eyes. "I built a case out of things I knew were not the truth, because I was afraid of something and I dressed the fear up as principle." He paused. My father would have hated that. I looked at him. I thought about Victor saying his mother's name with the word afraid underneath it. I thought about Obina's jaw in the hospital corridor. I thought about every man who had come to the same place, through the same narrow hallway of fear and had chosen, at the last moment, to come out the other side of it. Your mother chose me with full information, I said, about everything I am and everything I'm not. She's not a woman who makes uninformed decisions. I know, he said. Then trust that, I said. He was quiet for a moment. I don't know you, he said. I haven't tried to. No, I said. I'd like to, he said. If that's possible. I looked at him. He was 28 years old, and he had spent 4 years carrying the weight of a name and a legacy and a grief that had arrived before he was ready for it. And he had handled all of it with the specific clumsiness of someone doing the best they could with the tools they had, which was all any of us ever did. Come to Kumasi sometime, I said. I'll show you the workshop. He blinked. He had clearly expected something more formal, something more weighted. The workshop, he said. Your great-grandfather started from a market stall in Kajetia, I said. My father started from a cinder block building on a street with no name. I think they would have understood each other. I paused. I think we can too. He was quiet. Then he nodded. Once. The nod of someone who has received something they didn't know they were looking for. He held out his hand. I shook it. The grip was different this time. We drove back to the hotel in the same car we had arrived in, and the Accra night was doing what Accra nights do, warm and enormous, and completely indifferent to the particular drama that had taken place inside one of its convention centers, the city moving on with its usual inexhaustible momentum. Nana Ama was quiet for the first 5 minutes, looking at the city through the window. I had learned, in 11 months, to distinguish between her silences. The working silence of someone processing a decision, the resting silence of someone who has finished a long effort and is letting themselves stop, the particular silence of someone who has something to say and is deciding how to say it. This was the third kind. You called Aqua before you told me about the conversation with Dr. Asumeng Boate, she said finally. Yes, I said. You already knew to call her before the conversation confirmed there was something to prepare for. I've been prepared since the moment you told me Kwame was going to be there tonight, I said. She turned from the window to look at me. You knew, she said. I suspected, I said. A man who has been protecting a name his whole life, in a public setting, with formal board members present. If he was going to act, tonight was the right moment. I paused. I keep records of everything. My father's habit. I reviewed the contract file the week before the gala. The procurement recommendation has been in my filing system for 11 months. She was quiet. You came to this evening prepared for the worst, she said. I come to everything prepared for the worst, I said. It's more efficient than being surprised. She looked at me for a long moment. The city lights moved through the car windows across her face, gold and white, and the amber of traffic signals. And she was beautiful in the specific way of someone who has been through a long, difficult evening and come out the other side of it as exactly themselves. Kwabena, she said. Yes. I need you to understand something. Tell me, I said. I did not bring you to that gala to make a statement, she said. I know that's how it read. To the room, to my son, to everyone who had an opinion about it. She held my gaze. I brought you because you are part of my life, and I wanted you there. That's the whole reason. Not politics, not declaration, not a message to anyone. She paused. Just you. Just this. I looked at her. The car moved through the Accra night. I know, I said. You're not bothered by any of it, she said. The room, the looks, Kwame, Abena, none of it. I'm bothered, I said. I just know what to do with bothered. She almost smiled. Your father, she said. The anger that waits, I said. She reached across the seat and took my hand. We rode the rest of the way in the good silence. The silence of two people who have been through something together and have come out on the same side of it and don't need to narrate it to know that it was real. The weeks after the gala did not resolve into simplicity. Real things rarely do. Kwame called his mother 3 days later and had a long conversation that she told me about afterward in careful, considered fragments. Not because she was hiding anything, but because some conversations belong first to the people who had them, and the summarized version is the only version that belongs to anyone else. What she told me was that Kwame had been honest in a way he hadn't been in years about the grief and the fear and the specific loneliness of being the person left to carry a name when the person who gave it to you is gone. She said he had cried, which surprised him more than it surprised her. She said they had talked for 2 hours and had reached a place that was not resolution. Resolution takes longer, but was the beginning of the possibility of one. She said at the end of telling me, "He wants to come to Kumasi." "I know," I said. "I invited him." She was quiet for a moment. "You invited him," she said. "At the gala, before we left." She looked at me with the expression she sometimes had, not quite a smile, something more internal than that, and said nothing. "He came 3 weeks later, on a Saturday morning, in a rental car that was significantly more sensible than anything in the family fleet, and he stood at the entrance of Asante Auto with the expression of someone who has arrived somewhere specific and is not entirely sure what to do with the arrival. I showed him the workshop the way I had offered to show it to him, not as a demonstration, not as a statement about anything, simply as the place where I worked, with the honesty of someone who has spent their entire life in a space and has no reason to frame it as anything other than what it is. He asked questions. Not the testing, strategic questions of the gala, genuine questions. About the diagnostic system my father had built. About how I had expanded after taking over. About the vocational training program I ran for young mechanics, which he had not known about until that morning. He spent an hour in the workshop, and then we ate at the Kelaweel spot across the road, sitting on plastic chairs in the Kumasi heat with the city noise around us, and he said, at some point during the second serving, "This is where she comes on Saturdays." "Yes," I said. "She eats here?" "She eats here," I said. He looked at the cart. At the woman selling kelawele, who had been there for 11 months of Saturday visits, and who greeted Nana Ama by now with the easy familiarity of someone who knows a regular customer's order without being asked. "She's happy," Kwame said. Not a question, a recognition, said out loud, of something he had been trying to confirm. "Yes," I said. He nodded. He ate his kelawele. He looked at the street. "My father used to say," he said slowly, "that the measure of a person was what they did when no one important was watching." He paused. "I've been asking around about you. The people in this neighborhood, your employees, the clients who have been with you since before the Boateng contract." He looked at me. "The answer is consistent." "Consistent how?" I said. He looked at me with an expression that had none of the architecture of the gala in it. Just a young man, sitting on a plastic chair, arriving at something honestly. "The same whether anyone is watching or not," he said. I held his gaze. "Your grandfather was the same," I said, "from everything your mother has told me." He was quiet for a moment. "She talks about him to you," he said. "Yes," I said. "The way she talks about him makes me wish I had met him." Kwame looked at the street. Something settled in his face. Not resolution, not the end of anything complicated, but the beginning of a different posture toward something. The beginning of a man who has been carrying a thing one way for a long time, trying out a different way of carrying it. He stayed for lunch. He drove back to Accra in the afternoon. He called his mother that evening. I know this because she called me afterward, and I could hear in her voice the specific quality that comes after a conversation that has moved something that has been stuck for a long time. "He liked you," she said. We'll see, I said. He liked you, she said again, more certain. I smiled into the phone. Good, I said. The Boateng Foundation procurement review, which Kwame had formally withdrawn, but which 2 board members had requested proceed anyway, as a matter of institutional diligence, was completed 4 months after the gala. The independent auditor's finding was clean and unambiguous. The vendor selection had been conducted in accordance with the Foundation's stated procurement standards, with no evidence of preferential treatment or prior relationship affecting the decision. The auditor's report was presented at the next quarterly board meeting. Dr. Asumeng Boti moved that it be entered into the Foundation's permanent record. It was seconded immediately. The vote was unanimous. Nana Ama did not look at me during the vote. She was looking at the table, with her hands folded in front of her and the composed expression she wore in formal settings. But I was beside her, and I was close enough to see, in the slight relaxation of her shoulders when the vote was confirmed, the specific quality of someone who has been carrying the possibility of an unjust outcome for 4 months and has just been told it is not going to happen. I put my hand over hers under the table, briefly, the way she had held my hand in the ballroom. She did not look up, but she turned her hand over and held mine back. Abena Mensah called Nana Ama 2 months after the audit report, and Nana Ama told me about the conversation the next morning with a slightly puzzled expression. She wants to meet you properly, she said. For dinner, the 3 of us. Properly, I said. Her word. Nana Ama paused. She said, and I'm quoting, "I formed an opinion prematurely and I don't like doing that. I'd like to correct it." I thought about it. Tell her yes, I said. Nana Ama looked at me. You're not going to ask me what she said at the beginning of the gala evening, she said. I was there, I said. You're not angry about it. I thought about it honestly. She came to see what I looked like, I said. She saw me. She revised. That's the best version of that kind of thing. I paused. I'm not going to be angry at someone for updating their assessment when the evidence changes. That's just being rational. Nana Ama looked at me for a moment. You are the most even-tempered man I have ever known, she said. My father was even-tempered, I said. Your father again, she said. He was a good teacher, I said. She smiled, the real one. The dinner with Abena was, in the end, simply a dinner. 3 people at a restaurant in Accra, talking about things that mattered. Abena was sharp and funny, and direct in the way of people who have lived long enough to have given up the inefficiency of social indirection. She asked me about my father, which was not what I had expected, and listened to the answers with genuine attention. At the end of the evening, when we were leaving, she put her hand briefly on my arm and said, Edmund would have talked to you for hours. It was the second time she had said something like this. Both times I had understood what it meant. It meant, I have revised. The revision is complete. We can move forward. I hope I would have held up my end, I said. She smiled. I think you would have, she said. 2 years after the gala, Asante Auto expanded. Not dramatically. There was nothing in my nature that inclined toward the dramatic expansion of things that were working well at their current scale. But the vocational training program that I had been running informally for 3 years had grown to the point where it needed its own space, its own dedicated equipment, its own staff who were focused on the teaching rather than on the workshop's daily operations. The Boateng Foundation provided the funding, not as a gift and not as a favor. As a formal grant, applied for, reviewed by an independent committee, and awarded on the basis of the program's documented outcomes, which were considerable. 48 graduates in 3 years, 39 of whom were employed in automotive or related technical fields, 7 of whom had opened their own operations. Nana Ama had recused herself from the grant committee because of her relationship with the applicant, which was the correct thing to do, and which she had done without being asked, because it was always the correct thing to do. The grant was awarded anyway. The new training center opened on a Thursday morning in March, on a plot 2 streets from the original workshop. The ceremony was small. I do not do large ceremonies. They feel performative for something that is simply a thing becoming more of what it already was. The staff were there, and Chidi, who had been my first apprentice, and who now ran the training program, with the particular combination of technical excellence and genuine teaching instinct that was rare and worth celebrating. And my mother, who came from her house on the other side of Kumasi, and stood at the entrance of the new building, and looked at it in the same way she had looked at the original workshop on the day my father built the last wall, without saying much. With everything said, Nana Ama was there. Kwame was there. He had come without being asked specifically, which was its own kind of statement. He had driven up from Accra the night before and stayed at a hotel near the Kajetia market and spent the morning walking around the old market district that his great-grandfather had started from, with the expression of someone doing something they had been meaning to do for a long time. He stood beside me at the entrance of the new center during the opening, and he said quietly, while the other guests were inside, "My grandfather would have started something like this." "I know," I said. "He started exactly something like this," Kwame said. "Different form, same idea." He paused. He saw people who had capability and no access, and he found a way to connect those two things. I looked at him. "Yes," I said. "That's it, exactly." He nodded slowly. Then he said, "I've been thinking about the Foundation's vocational programs. We have 3 currently. They're underfunded, and the evaluation framework is weak." He looked at the new center. "I'd like to talk to you about how you've structured this one. Not to copy it, the context is different, but to understand the principles." I turned to look at him. He was looking at the building, at the entrance where even now 3 of the current cohort students were talking animatedly about something, the particular energy of young people who have been given a tool and are still in the period of discovering how much it can do. "Come back next week," I said. "I'll walk you through everything." He came back the following Tuesday. We spent 4 hours going through the curriculum, the selection process, the mentorship model, the relationship with local employers. He asked good questions and took careful notes and had the particular quality, which I had not expected and which surprised me, of someone who was genuinely trying to understand rather than extract. By the end of the afternoon, we were sitting at the small table in my office with the sounds of the workshop coming through the walls, and the Kumasi late afternoon doing its warm and unhurried thing outside. He said, "You're good at this." "The teaching or the explaining?" I said. "Both," he said. "But I meant the whole thing." He gestured vaguely at the workshop, the training center, the street visible through the window. Building something that actually works. Not the version of it that looks good in a report. The real version. I looked at my father's tools on the wall. My father used to say that anything worth building takes longer than you think it will, and looks different at the end than you planned, I said. He said the ones that last are the ones where the builder was more committed to the thing working than to the thing looking the way they imagined it. Kwame was quiet for a moment. "He sounds like someone worth knowing," he said. "He was," I said. "Tell me about him," Kwame said. So I did, and we sat there in the office, as the Kumasi afternoon moved toward evening, talking about a man who had built a workshop on a street with no name and raised a son with the specific understanding that dignity was not something you asked for, it was something you carried. And by the time the light had changed and the workshop had gone quiet, and the city outside had settled into the particular register of a Thursday evening, something had shifted between us that had nothing to do with the gala or the motion or the envelope or any of the architecture that had preceded it. Just two people talking about someone worth knowing. That was enough. That was, in fact, more than enough. The night before the second Boateng Foundation Gala, Nana Ama and I sat in the garden of the Accra house, a garden her mother had planted, which Nana Ama maintained with the same specific faithfulness she brought to every inheritance worth keeping. And the night was warm, and the city was its usual enormous self, beyond the walls, and the garden smelled of night flowers, and the good strong coffee she always kept warm in the late evening. "Tomorrow," she said. "Tomorrow," I said. She looked at the garden. "Are you ready for it this time?" I thought about it honestly. The suit was mine this year. Same tailor, same measurements, designed for the specific person I was, rather than the person a borrowed suit implied. The calluses were still on my hands, and the boots were still polished, and I still owned one workshop on a street with no formal name, and a training center that was doing something real. Nothing had changed about what I was. Everything had changed about how the room would read it. Not because the room had changed, because I had walked through it once, and the room had looked at me, and I had looked back, and neither of us had looked away first. And that specific exchange had established something that rooms remember. "I was ready last time," I said. She looked at me. "You were," she said. "I know." She paused. "I just wanted to give you the chance to say it out loud this time." I understood what she meant. "I'm ready," I said. She smiled. "Good," she said, "because Kwame is coming this year with his new girlfriend, and she is from Tamale and works in agricultural development and has apparently never attended a black tie event, and he is slightly terrified." I looked at her. "He told me to ask if you had any advice," she said, with the particular expression of someone delivering information that they find privately amusing. I thought about it. "Tell him to wear something that fits, and be exactly who he is," I said. "The room will figure out the rest." She laughed. The real laugh, unguarded and quick, the one she never used anywhere except in spaces she trusted completely. "I'll tell him," she said. She leaned against my shoulder. The garden was warm and quiet around us, with the city moving beyond its walls in its indifferent, perpetual way, and the coffee cooling slowly on the table between us, and the night flowers doing what night flowers do, opening in the dark, unhurried, for no audience except the people who had chosen to be present. I thought about the ballroom, about the chandeliers and the marble floors, and the room that had looked at me and decided what I was before I opened my mouth. About the borrowed suit and the document in the certified envelope, and the vote in the small room at the end of the evening. About Kwame across the Kelaweli cart on a Kumasi Saturday, arriving at something honestly. About a highway in July, and a direct voice through a car window and a question, "Why did you stop?" that I had answered without knowing it would change everything. I thought about my father, building on a street with no name, with tools and time, and the specific dignity of a man who knew that the work mattered more than whether the room agreed. The work always mattered more. And the rooms could be walked through, with the right shoes, polished, with the right document, filed and ready, with the right person at your shoulder, with the patience that waits, and the steadiness that stays. If this story stayed with you, if you felt every moment of Kwabena's quiet strength, Nana Ama's courage, and everything that happened in that ballroom when the truth finally had a room big enough to stand in, then subscribe. Share this with someone who needs to know that dignity cannot be voted out of a room. Leave a comment telling us which moment changed something in you, because the next story is already waiting. And it begins, the way the best ones always do, with someone who has been underestimated for the very last time. Stay with us.